Good day, everyone. Today we are going to talk about a topic in linear algebra called inner product and spaces. This is prepared by Ranz Michael B. Malabote for M3319 Linear Algebra. By the end of this presentation, you will understand what length and distance mean for vectors and how we can multiply vectors together using something called the dot product and inner product. This chapter has 5 parts. First, we will learn about length and dot product of vectors. Second, we will learn about inner products spaces, which is like a bigger, more general version of a dot of the dot product. Third, we will learn the Gram-Schmid process, which help us build orthonormal bases. That means a set of vectors that are all perpendicular to each other and each one has a length of 1. Fourth is we will talk about mathematical models and least squares analysis, which helps us find the best possible answer even when a system of equations does not have an exact solution. And finally, we will look at a real-life application of inner product spaces. Let's start with the length of a vector. Think of a vector as an arrow that points from one location to another. If we have a vector v with numbers vector 1 and vector 2 up to vector n, we find its length by squaring each other, adding up all squared numbers together, and then getting the square root of the total. This is very similar to the Pythagorean theorem you learned in grade 8 math, where we square two sides of a right triangle to get the hypotenuse. Another name for length is norm. And there are 4 important rules about length. The length is never negative. A vector with length exactly 1 is called unit vector. A vector has 0 only if it is the 0 vector. And if we multiply vector by a number c, the new length is just the absolute value of c times the original length. Let's try 2 examples. In example A, we have a vector with 5 numbers, 0, -2, 1, 4, and -2. We square each number. 0 squared is 0, -2 squared is 4, 1 squared is 1, 4 squared is 16, and -2 squared is 4. Again, adding them give us 25, and the square root of 25 is 5. So the length of this vector is 5. In example B, the vector has fractions using the square root of 17. When we square each fraction and add them, we get 17 over 17, which is exactly 1. So this vector already has a length of 1. That means it is already unit vector. So based on this property. In math, we have special vectors called standard unit vectors. These are vectors where only one number is 1 and all the other numbers are 0. In 2 dimensions, we call them I and j. I is 1, 0 and j is 0, 1. In 3 dimensions, we add k, which is 0, 0, 1. These are like the basic building blocks, the x, y, and z directions. Now, 2 vectors are called parallel if one is just a number multiplied by the number, written as u equals c times v. If that number is c positive, both vectors point in the same direction. If c is negative, they point in opposite direction. Length of a scalar multiplo. This theorem says if you multiply a vector v by a number c, the length of the new vector is the absolute value of c times the original length of v. Why is this true? If we write out cv, every number inside the vector gets multiplied by c. When we square each other to find the length, that c also gets squared. We can pull c squared outside the square root, which turns into the absolute value of c. What is left inside is exactly the original length of v. So we end up proving that the length of CV is absolute value of C times the length of V. This theorem tells us how to shrink or stretch any non-zero vector V so that it becomes a unit vector, but it still points in the same direction. We do this by dividing V by its own length. We call this new vector U. Since V is not zero, its length is a positive number. So dividing it is allowed because we divided by a positive number, U still points the same way as V. And when we check the length of U, it always comes out exactly 1. That is why U is called unit vector in the direction of V. Here are the two quick notes to remember. First, the vector V divided by its own length is called unit vector in the direction of V. Second, the process of finding this unit vector is called normalizing the vector. So whenever your teacher says normalize this vector, it simply means divide the vector by its length. So let's normalize the vector v equals 3, negative 1, and 2. First, we find its length. 3 squared plus negative 1 squared plus 2 squared equals 9, plus 1 plus 4, which is 14. So the length of v is the square root of 14. So to normalize v, we divide each number in v by the square root of 14, giving us 3 over root of 14, negative 1 over root 14, 2 over root of 14. To check if this is really a unit vector, we squared each of these three numbers and add them together. We get 14 over 14, which is equal to 1. Since the length is 1, we have confirmed that this is a proper unit vector. Okay. Just like we can measure the distance between 2 points on a map, we can also measure the distance between two vectors. The distance between vector u and vector v is simply the length of their difference, u minus v. There are three simple rules about distance. Distance is never negative. The distance between two vectors is 0 only when the vectors are exactly the same. And lastly, the distance from u to v is the same as the distance from v to u. The order does not matter. Let's find the distance between u equals 0, 2, and 2, and v equals 2, 0, and 1. First, we subtract u minus v, give us 0 minus 2, 2 minus 0, and 2 minus 1, which is negative 2, 2, and 1. Next, we find the length of new vector. Negative 2 squared is 4, 2 squared is 4, 1 squared is 1, and adding them give us 9, and the square root of 9 is 3. So therefore, the distance between u and v is 3. Now, let's learn the dot product. The dot product of two vectors u and v is found by multiplying their matching number or numbers together and then adding everything up. This gives us one number called a scalar, not another vector. For example, if u is 1, 2, 0, and negative 3, and v is 3, negative 2, 4, and 2, matching we multiply those matching pairs. 1 times 3, 3 times 1 times 3 equals 3, 2 times negative 2 equals to 4, 0 times 4 equals to 0, and negative 3 times 2 equals to negative 6. Adding this together, we have 3 minus 4 plus 0 minus 6 give us a negative 7. So the dot product of u and v is negative 7. The dot product follows 5 important rules. First, the order does not matter. U dot v is the same as v dot u. Second, the dot product can be distributed. Similar to multiplication in algebra, u dot the sum of v and w equals u dot v plus u, or plus u dot w. Third, you if you multiply by a constant number c, you can place that c anywhere in the expression, and the answer stays the same. Fourth, you um if you dot a vector with itself, the number is exactly the length of that vector squared. Fifth is dotting a vector with itself always gives an answer that is 0 or more, and it equals 0 only if the vector itself is the 0 vector. Next is the Euclidean n space. Rn is simply the set of all lists of n real numbers like vector 1, vector 2, up to vector n. When we combine Rn with the usual operation we already know, adding vectors, multiplying by a number, measuring length, and the dot product, the whole package is given a special name, Euclidean n space. This is basically the regular vector space we have been using all along, just with a formal name, Euclidean n space. So given u, 2 and negative 2, v equals 5 and 8, and w equals negative 4 and 3, let's solve let us solve 5 small problems. A, u dot v, 2 times 5 plus negative 2 times 8 equals to 10 minus 16, which is negative 6. For the b, u dot v times w, since u dot v is negative 6, as we have answered here in letter A, we multiply negative 6 each number in w, giving us 24 and 18. And for the c, u dot 2v, this is the same as 2 times u dot v, so 2 times 6 equals negative 12. And for the d, the length of w squared is the same as w dot w. So negative 4 times negative 4 plus 3 times 3 equals 16 plus 9, which is 25. And for u dot v minus 2w, we first compute v minus 2w, which is equal to 13 and 2. Then dot it with u, so 2 times 13 plus negative 2 times 2 equals 26 minus 4, which is 22. Okay. Sometimes we are given a dot product values directly without knowing the actual vectors. Here are told you dot u equals to 39, u dot v equals negative 3, and v dot v equals 79. We want to find u plus 2v dot 3u plus v. So instead of solving for u and v directly, we simply expand this expression the same way as we expand algebra expression like a plus b times c plus d. Using distributive property of the dot product after expanding and simplifying, we get 3 times u dot u plus 7 times u dot v plus 2 times v dot v. Plugging in the given numbers, 3 times 39 plus 7 times negative 3 plus 2 times 79, which equals 117, minus 21 plus 158, giving us a final answer of 254. Okay, orthogonal vectors. Two vectors are called orthogonal if their dot product equals 0. In simple words, orthogonal is just a fancy math word for perpendicular or forming a perfect right angle with each other. Also, remember this special rule: the zero vector is considered orthogonal to every other vector since dotting anything with the zero vector always gives us zero. So, let's find all vectors that are orthogonal to u equals 4 and 2. We let v equals vector 1 and vector 2, an unknown vector. For u and v to be orthogonal, their dot product must equal to 0. So 4 vector 1 plus 2 vector 2 equals 0. Solving this equation, we let vector 2 equal any number t, and then vector 1 becomes negative over 2. So the answer is any vector of the form negative t over 2 and t, where t can be any real number, will be orthogonal to u. This makes sense because there are actually many vectors, a whole line of them, that are perpendicular to u. Moving this theorem says that the length of u plus v is always less than or equal to the length of u plus the length of v. This is just like a triangle. The length of one side can never be longer than the sum of the other two sides. To prove this, we expand the length of u plus v squared using the dot product rules, which gives us the length of u squared plus 2 times u dot v plus the length of v squared. Since u dot v might be negative, um, we replace it with its absolute value to make the inequality safe, and then we use another rule, the Cauchy-Schwarz inequality, to show that everything fits perfectly into the squared form of length of u plus length of v. Taking the square root of both sides gives us our final inequality. And remember, um, the two sides are exactly equal only when u and v point in the same direction. This is the same Pythagorean theorem you already learned before, but written using vector length. It says that u and v are orthogonal, meaning they meet at a triangle if and only if the length of u plus v squared equals the length of u squared plus the length of v squared. This is exactly familiar rule as squared plus b, um, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, just written using vectors instead of triangle sides. We can also write the dot product using matrix multiplication. If we write vector u as a column of numbers and vector v also as a column of numbers, then the product of u times v is the same as taking the transpose of u, turning it into a row, and multiplying it by v as a matrix. Multiplying a 1 by n or 1 by n row matrix by an n by 1 column matrix gives us exactly the same answer as the dot product. u1 u1 v1 plus u2 v2 and so on. This shows us that the dot product and matrix multiplication are really doing the same thing. They are just equal. Now we move to a bigger idea called the inner product. An inner product is like an upgraded, more flexible version of the dot product. It is a function that takes two vectors u and v from a vector space V and gives us back one real number, written as angle brackets u, comma v. For something to be called true inner product, it must follow four rules. Order does not matter. It can be distributed over addition. A constant number c can be moved in or out freely, and the inner product of any vector with itself must be positive or must be zero or positive, being exactly zero only when the vector itself is zero. These are the same style of rules the product I in the dot product, but now they apply to a much wider variety of situation. Let's clarify some terms. The regular dot we learned earlier is actually just one specific example of an inner product. It is called the Euclidean inner product for Rn. The more general angle bracket notation, U, V, stands for any inner product defined on any vector space V. When a vector space V is given a specific inner product to work with, we call the whole package an inner product space. So a normal vector space only has addition and scalar multiplication, but an inner product space also comes with this special multiplication rule between two vectors. Now, let's prove that the regular dot product um actually satisfies all four inner product axioms. We simply define the inner product of U and V as the dot product U dot V, which equals U1 V1 plus U2 V2 and so on. Since we already proved in theorem 5.3 that the dot product satisfies all four required rules, we can directly conclude that the dot product is indeed valid in inner product in Rn. Okay, not all inner product looks exactly like the regular dot product. Here, we are given new function. The inner product of U and V equals U1 V1 plus 2 times U2 V2. Notice that extra 2 multiplied to the second pair of numbers. Let's check if this still satisfies the rules. For rule A, swapping U and V gives us the same answer, since multiplication order does not matter. For rule B, we test distributing over addition using a third vector W, and after expanding everything carefully, we find that the inner product of U with V plus W is indeed equal to the inner product of U and V plus the inner product of U and W. Continuing to our um, example, for rule C, pulling out the constant C works correctly whether we place it inside or outside the inner product. For rule D, the inner product of V with itself, V1 squared 2 times V2 squared is always equal to 0 or positive, and becomes exactly 0 when both V1 and V2 are 0, meaning V itself is the 0 vector. Since all fall rules check out, this new formula is confirmed as a valid inner product on R2. In fact, we can make a whole family of similar inner product using the positive constant C1, C2, up to Cn, as long as every constant used is a positive number. Let's look at a function that are similar, but it fails the test. U dot V equals U1 V1 minus 2U 2 times U2 V2 plus U3 V3. Notice the negative sign in front in the middle term. To check if this is valid inner product, we try specific vector. V equals 1, 2, 1, computing V dot V. 1 times 1 minus 2 times 2 times 2 plus 1 times 1 give us 1 minus 8 plus 1, which is equal to negative 6. And 6, negative 6 is less than 0. This breaks the rule number 4, which requires the inner product of a vector itself is to never be a negative. Because this rule fails, we conclude that this function is not valid inner product in R3. So we have here the properties of inner products. In inner product also follows some extra helpful rules. First, the inner product of the zero vector with anything is always zero. Second, we can distribute the inner product over addition even on the left side. U plus V dot W equals U dot W plus V dot W. Third, a constant C can pulled out even when it is multiplying the second vector. We also define the norm or length of any vector u in an inner product space as the square root of the inner product of u with itself. This matches um what we already know. Length squared always um equals a vector dotted with itself. Okay. Using the general inner product, we can also define distance, angle, and or orthogonality. Just like we did with the regular dot product, the distance between u and v is the square root of the inner product of u minus v with itself. The angle between two non-zero vector u and v can be found using the cosine formula. Cosine theta equals the inner product of u and v divided by the product of their length, and two vectors u and v are called orthogonal if their inner product equals exactly 0, written as u perpendicular v. Let's review the basic properties. For norm or length, it is never negative. It equals 0 only for the 0 vector, and multiplying a vector by a constant c multiplies its length by the absolute value of c. For distance, it is never negative. It equals 0 only when the two vectors are exactly the same. The distance from u to v always equal to the distance from v to u. This slide summarizes the three very important results for any inner product space. First, the Cauchy-Schwarz inequality says that the absolute value of the inner product of u and v is always less than or equal to the product of their lengths. This was theorem 5.4. Second, the triangle inequality says that the length of u plus v always less than or equal to the sum of their individual lengths. This is the theorem 5.5. Third, the Pythagorean theorem tells us that u and v are orthogonal if and only if the length of u plus v squared equals the sum of their squared lengths. This is theorem 5.6. So these three big ideas connects everything we've learned so far about the vector length and direction. For the orthogonal projections and inner product spaces, sometimes we want to find the shadow that one vector casts on another. This is called a projection. If u and v are two vectors in an inner product space V, and v is not the zero vector, the orthogonal projection of u onto v is found using this formula. Take the inner product of u and v, divide it by the inner product of v with itself, then multiplying the result by v. if V happens to already be a unit vector, meaning its own inner product with itself equals 1, the formula becomes much simpler. The projection of U onto V is just the inner product of U and V multiplied by V. Now let's talk about the orthogonal and orthonormal sets. A set S, a set S in an inner product space V is called an orthogonal set if every pair different vectors or every if every pair of different vectors inside that set has an inner product of 0, meaning every pair is perpendicular to each other. If we go one step further and require that every single vector in the set also has a length of exactly 1, we call the set orthonormal. If this special set S also happens to be a basis, meaning it can build the whole vector space, we call it an orthogonal basis or orthonormal basis. So let's check for if a given set S of three vectors is truly an orthonormal basis for R3. First, we check if all pairs the orthogonal by computing their dot product, computing V1 dot V2. We carefully multiply and add the matching numbers, and it comes out to exactly 0. Doing the same for vector 1 dot vector 3 and vector 2 dot vector 3, both also gives us 0. Since every pair has a dot product of 0, we confirm that these three vectors are mutually orthogonal. Next is we need to check if each vector also has a length of exactly 1. So computing length of vector 1, we square its numbers, add them, and take the square root. The number is 1. We do the same for vector 2 and vector 3, and both also give us the length of 1. Since all three vectors are mutually orthogonal and all three have a length of exactly 1, we can now confirm that S is truly an orthonormal set. Okay. This theorem tells us something very useful. If S is an orthogonal set of non-zero vectors, then S is automatically linearly independent, meaning none of the vectors in the set can be created by combining the others. To prove this, we assume that a combination of the vectors C1 V1 plus C2 V2 and so on equals the zero vector. We then take the inner product of both sides with one specific vector, Vi. Because the set is orthogonal, all the terms disappear except one, leaving us with Ci times the inner product of Vi with itself equals 0. Since V1 is a non-zero vector, its inner product with itself cannot be 0, which forces Ci to be 0. Since this is true for every constant, all the constant must be 0, proving that the set is linearly independent. The Gram-Schmidt process is a step-by-step method to turn any regular basis into an orthogonal and orthonormal basis. We start with the basis B, made up of vectors u1, u2 up to un. We keep the first vector as is, v1 equals to u1. For the second vector, we subtract away the shadow or the projection of u2 onto v1, leaving only the part of u2 that is perpendicular to v1. For the third vector, we subtract away its projection onto both v1 and v2. We keep repeating this term for every remaining vector. At the end, we get a new set of B, or B prime, that is fully orthogonal. If we then normalize each other or each vector, meaning divide each one by its own length, we get B double prime, which is fully orthonormal bases. Let's apply Gram-Schmidt to this basis B, made of U1 equals 1 and 1 comma 1 comma 0 and U2 equals 1 comma 2 comma 0 and U3 equals 0 comma 1 comma 2. We start with V1 equals to U1, so V1 is 1, 1, 0. Next, we find V2 by subtracting the projection of U2 onto V1. We compute U2 dot V1 divided by V1 dot V1, which is 3 over 2, and subtract 3 over 2 2 times V1 from U2, giving us V2 equals negative 1 half, 1 half, and 0. And finally, for V3, we subtract the projection onto both V1 and V2 from U3. After doing the calculations, we end up with square root of, V3 equals 0, 0, and 2. We have fully, now that we have a fully orthogonal set of V1, V2, and V3. Now let's move to a bigger topic, least squares analysis, which helps us find the best possible answer even when an exact number does not exist. First, we need to understand orthogonal subspaces. Two subspaces W1 and W2 of an inner product space V are called orthogonal if the inner product of any vector from W1 and any vector from W2 is always 0. In our example, W1 is built from two vectors and W2 is built from one vector. When we check all their inner products, everything comes out to 0, confirming that W1 and W2 are orthogonal subspaces. So we have here, if W is a subspace of an inner product space V, we say a vector U is orthogonal to W. If U is orthogonal to every single vector inside W, the set of all such vectors, every vector in V that is orthogonal to all of W is called the orthogonal complement of W, written as W with a small perpendicular symbol and read as W perp. Two quick facts, the orthogonal complement of just the zero set is the entire space V, and the orthogonal complement of the entire space V is just the zero vector. Here are the three more useful facts about W perp or W perpendicular. Um, where W is a subspace of V. First, W perp is is itself also a valid space of V. Second, W and W perp only share one common vector, the zero vector. Third, if you take the orthogonal complement of the orthogonal complement, you end up back at the original W. As an example, if V is R2 and W is the x-axis, then W perp is the y-axis. These two only meet at the origin point, 0, 0, and taking the perp of the perp brings us right back to the x-axis. This theorem gives us a formula to project any vector V onto a whole subspace S, not just onto a single vector. If U1, U2 up to UT form an orthonormal basis for subspace S, then the projection of V onto S is found by adding together the projection of V onto each basis vector. the inner product of V and U1 times U1 plus the inner product V and U2 times U2 and so on, the proof relies on the fact that this projection lives inside W. And since the UI vectors form an orthonormal basis, we can rewrite everything using those special inner product properties, and eventually showing the formula holds to be true. We are given W1 equals 031, W2 equals 200, and V equals 113. We want to project V onto the space W, which is spanned by W1 and W2. First, we need an orthonormal basis for W. So we need to normalize W1 and W2 by dividing each by their own length, giving us U1 and U2. Now we now we apply the projection formula. We compute V dot U1, multiply it by U1, then add V dot U2, multiplied by U2. After doing the arithmetic, our final projection of V onto W turns out to be 1, 9 over 5, and 3 over 5. There's actually another way to find the same projection using matrices instead of an orthonormal basis. We build matrix A using the original vectors W1 and W2 as its columns, and let B equal our vector V. We are basically trying to solve Ax equals B. The solution X can be found using the formula X equals the inverse of A transpose A multiplied by A transpose B. Once we have X, the projection of B onto the column of A is simply A times X. This matrix method gives us exactly the same projection answer as before, just using different approach. So every matrix A has four fundamental subspaces connected to it, and this theorem shows how they relate to each other through orthogonal complements. The orthogonal complement of the column space of A is the null space of A transpose and vice versa. Similarly, the orthogonal complement of the column space of A transpose is the null of A. Also, if A is an M by N matrix, the column space of A combined with the null space of A transpose fills up the entire space Rm. And the column space of A transpose combined with the null space of A fills up the entire space Rn. These relationships are very useful when solving systems of equation. Let's find the four fundamental subspaces of a matrix A that is already in reduced row echelon form. The column space of A, which comes from its pivot columns, turns out to be the span of 1, 0, 0, and 0, 1, 0, 0, a subspace of R4. The column space of A transpose is also called row space of A. Is the span of 1, 2, 0, and 0, 0, 1, a subspace of R3. The null space of A, which comes from solving Ax equals 0, is the span of negative 2, 1, and 0. It is also a subspace of R3. Now we find the null space of A transpose by solving A transpose times X equals 0. After row reducing A transpose, we get free variables S and T, and the resulting null space is the span of 0, 0, 1, 0 and 0, 0, 0, 1, a subspace of R4. We can double check our earlier theorem. The column space of A and the null space of A transpose are indeed orthogonal complements of each other, and together they combine to fill the whole space R4. The same pattern is true for the column space of A transpose and the null space of A, which together fill up R3. Suppose W is a subspace of RW spanned by W1, which is equal to 1, 2, 1, and 0, and W2 equals 0, 0, 0, and 1. We want to A. Find a basis for W, and B. Find a basis for the orthogonal complement of W. So we start by putting these vectors as columns of a matrix A. Then row reduce it to its reduced row echelon form to check for pivot columns. Identify any patterns needed for the next step. For the part A, since W is exactly the column space of A, the basis for W is simply the original vectors 1, 2, 1, 0, and 0, 0, 0, and 1. For part B, the orthogonal complement of W equals the null space of A transpose. Solving A transpose x equals 0, we find that x sub 1, x sub 2, x sub 3, and x sub 4 can be written using two free variables s and t. Splitting these into two separate vectors gives us the basis for w perp, which is negative 2, 1, 0, and 0, and negative 1, 0, 1, and 0. As a final check, notice that the dimension of w plus the dimension of w perp equals the dimension of the whole space R4, and W combined with W per fully recreates the R4. Now let's talk about the solving systems of linear equations. AX equals B. If the system is consistent, meaning it actually has a real solution, we can use the Gaussian elimination with back substitution, a method you have probably already learned to solve for x. But sometimes the system is inconsistent, meaning there is no exact solution at all. In that case, our goal changes. Instead of finding the exact number or the exact answer, we try to solve the best possible answer. The value of x makes ax as close as possible to b, even if it's not a perfect match. Given a system ax equals b with m equations and n unknowns, the least squares problem asks us to find a vector x in Rn. That makes the distance between ax and b as small as possible. This special vectors x is called the least squares solution. In other words, we are looking for a vector x hat such that a times x hat equals the projection of B onto the column space of A, meaning AX hat is the closest possible point in the column space of A in the actual vector V. Now, let's find the least square solution for the system AX equals B, where A is a 3 by 2 matrix and B is 0, 1, 3. The system does not have an exact solution. So it is inconsistent. To find the least square solution, we use what is called the normal equation. A transpose times A times x hat equals A transpose times B. We calculate A transpose times A, which gives us a 2 by 2 matrix. And we also calculate A transpose times B, which gives us a 2 by 1 matrix. Continuing from before, we know that our normal system set up as a matrix equation, the 2 by 2 matrix 3 and 6, 6 and 14 multiplied by our unknown C0 and C1 equals 4 and 11. This is now a regular solvable systems of two equations with two unknowns, and we can solve it using the same elimination or substitution methods we already know from our previous discussion or in our algebra. So solving the normal system, we find that our least squares solution x hat is no this x hat negative 5 3 and 3 over 2. This means the best fit values for C0 and C1 are negative 5 over 3 and 3 over 2. Finally, find the orthogonal projections of B onto the column space of A. We simply multiply A by x hat, which gives us the vector negative 1 over 6, 8 over 6, and 17 over 6. This is the closest point in the column space of A to our original vector B, even though B itself cannot be exactly reached. And for here is the real world example of how the dot product is used outside of pure math. Electrical engineers use the dot product to calculate something called flux. This measures how strong an electric or magnetic field as it passes through the surface. Interestingly, for the closed surface surrounding an electric charge, the total electric flux depends on the amount of charge inside, but the total magnetic flux is always zero. This happens because electric fields have a clear starting point and ending point, from positive to negative charges, while magnetic fields form a complete closed loops that never start or stop at any single point. This shows that the ideas we learned in this chapter, like the dot product, are not just for solving math problems, they are also used by real scientists and engineers. That wraps up our discussion on inner product in spaces. We learn about the length and distance of vectors, the dot product and its properties, and more general inner product, orthogonal and orthonormal sets, the Gram-Schmidt process, projections onto spaces, and how least squares analysis helps us find the best possible solution when an exact one is not available. And thank you very much for your listening.